right, let's go on. Okay, we're going to go back. Okay, we're going to go back to number 3 in macroeconomics. GDP, national income determination, and then we're going to do fiscal policy, and I hope maybe if I last that long. Maybe we'll finish up macroeconomics. I don't know. We'll talk about doing the next ones. I guess. I don't know. I just don't know. I just don't know. Let's see how far. Let's see how far I can get. Okay, aggregate supply and aggregate demand we will not do. I will just do number 3 and then skip to number 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9. Begin with it, and we'll see. Maybe we'll take another break. And then I'll have another.
Professor, do you have another class after this?
No, I do not.
If you want to go into it a little bit, you could.
I can.
No, I'm just saying whoever can, I'll just make it from the video just to go in if you want to do it that way.
I don't know, we'll see if I can, maybe
Well, if it
next.
stays, and then I'll
All
just...
right, maybe next, maybe, let's play this by ear. Let's go to GDP, national income determination. We'll do fiscal policy, and I hope we'll do monetary policy and the rest of that stuff. Okay, national income determination, macroeconomics. Here, I have a little model here. Producer, consumer. Producer gives goods to the consumer gives money back. Right? Producer gives goods to the consumer gives money back. But the consumer, so this is goods. But the consumer provides the producer with the factors of production. In other words, for example, his labor. But the other factors of production as well. In other words, his land, his capital, his risk, all of those things he provides to the producer. So the producer has to give him money back as well for that. Now the point here is this. So money is going to the producer, money is going to the consumer. I'm going to switch the two monies. I'm going to switch it because, I don't know why. Because I always have income on this side and the other stuff on the other side. Income meaning the money going to the consumer and the money going to the producer on the right. The money going to the producer for the goods and services is on the right, and the money going to the consumer for his inputs is on the left. Right? Money going to the consumer for his inputs is on the left. The left side of the diagram. Just the left side of the diagram. What?
It's going to the producer.
Excuse me?
The left goes to the producer? No.
Yeah, I know, I switched it on this one. Switched it. That's what I said. I switched it. I just switched it. I switched it. Because you always, whatever. I just switched it. I made the money going to the consumer on the left, and the money going to the producer, I made it on the right. Okay. Now here's the point of the model, and this is the basis of the model. The basis of the model is that the producer gives money to the consumer for its inputs, meaning that he pays for the production of these goods. In other words, I pay all my workers, I pay all my capital, I pay all my land, I pay a little profit, and I make $100 worth of goods. So I paid out $100, which means that I now have $100 worth of goods. I now have, in other words, if I pay out $100, I now have $100 worth of goods. Now the consumer has to turn around and buy all those goods. pay for the goods and services. He has to buy it. If he buys less than that amount, then the producer is going to produce less. If, on the other hand, he makes it known to the producer he wants to buy more, the producer is going to produce more. So the equilibrium is going to be when the money going to the consumer is equal to the money going to the producer. In other words, the producer, will simply respond to what the consumer is asking for. He makes $100 worth of goods. If the consumer wants less, he'll make less. If the consumer wants more, he'll make more. And the system will come to equilibrium when the money going to the consumer is equal to the money going to the producer. And so that's the equilibrium. And that's the basis of the model. And we just have to complicate it a little bit. Just have to complicate it a little bit. We have to complicate it in the following way. We have to say as follows. Listen here. I gave him $100. And I wanted to give me back $100. But he can't give me back $100 because some of the money is going to be taxed. He can't give me back the $100 because some of the money is going to be taken away by Obama. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, I got $100, but he's taking 75. Now, some of it I'm going to save, right? Maybe I'll save $1. And some of it I'm going to spend on goods from China, like another $23 on goods from China, right? So 75 I gave to Obama, $1 I saved, 23 I bought from China, right? Imports. So that adds up to 99. I only have $1 to give back to the producer. The producer is very upset. He gave me $100. He produced $100 worth of goods, and I'm only buying $1 worth of goods. How does that work out? In other words, you cannot, the point here is you can't expect, in spite of the exaggerations, right? You can't expect the consumer to give back all the money to the producer. He's not going to be left with all the money, because some of it is being taxed away. Some of it is going to save, and some of it is going to be used to purchase from foreign producers. So how does this money that comes out, how is it returned to the producer? In other words, we'll see that there are ways in which it's returned to the producer. How is it returned to the producer? So first of all, taxes, it's easy to see how it's returned to the producer. It's returned to the producer in government spending. In other words, Obama takes $75, he spends it instead of me. I mean, that's the whole purpose of taxation. The whole purpose of taxation today is the government wants to take over the whole economy. So they want to take over all the money and then spend it. Okay. So the tax is going to be replaced with government spending. And the producer doesn't much care if he's getting the money from me or he's getting it from Obama. It's the same thing to him. He produced $100 worth of goods, he's selling $100 worth of goods. Now, imports is going to be replaced with exports. Imports can be replaced with exports. Because if I buy $23 worth of goods from this Chinese guy really can't spend the $23 in China because it's not legal tender in China. The only thing he can do is spend it here. So he's going to have to either spend it in the United States or sell it to someone who's going to spend it in the United States. And savings is replaced by investment. Let me show you how savings is replaced by investment. Okay, so government spending replaces taxes on a dollar-for-dollar basis. I mean, that's clear. It's just logical. Exports replaces imports on a dollar-to-dollar basis. That's clear. It's obvious. But how does savings replaced by investment? So the way I show you how savings is replaced by investment is as follows. Forget about, let's say there's no government spending, there's no exports and imports, no taxes, no government spending. We live in this utopia, no taxes, no government spending. No one's buying anything from anyone overseas. They're not buying from us. It's a closed economy. All you have is consumption and savings. All you have is consumption and savings. Okay, so now, I get $100 from the producer. The producer gives me $100. He gives me $90 to produce apples. He's giving me $100, right? Remember that, he's giving me $100. Give me $90 to produce apples, another $10 to produce apple pickers. Another $10 he gives me to produce apple pickers. I turn around and I give him back $90. He gave me $100, right? I turn around and I give him $90. I give him back $90. Am I happy? Is he happy? I mean, he's not happy. Is he happy? What? Is he happy? He gave me $100. I turn around and give him back only $90. Is he happy? You say no. Is he happy? He is happy. Ah. What do you think? Is he happy? Is he happy? Why is he happy?
Because he's going to get back anyway in return, and next time he produces whatever. It goes all in a cycle. He'll get back.
That's not. Why isn't he happy? Why do you think he's not happy? Well, she thinks he's not happy because I set down a principle before. I told you why he's not happy. If I give you $100, you got to give it back to me, right? So he's not happy, right? It's obvious he's not happy. But in this case, he's perfectly happy. You know why he's happy? Because he only produced $90 worth of apples. You can't buy the apple pickers. He wants to keep the apple pickers for himself. He gave me $100, it's true. But he gave me only $90 to produce apples. I only have $90 worth of apples to sell. I don't have the extra $10 worth of apple pickers to sell this guy. He doesn't want me to buy them. He wants me to take that money I gave him to produce the apple pickers. He wants me to take that money and save it. That's the way savings and investment are equal to each other. He wants me to take this $10 and save it because he only wants me to give him back $90. If I give him back more than $90, you have to produce more. Because the apple pickers aren't for sale. Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, when I set down the principle that if I produced $100 worth of goods, he has to buy $100 worth of goods, that was talking about consumer goods, not investment goods. If I produced $100 worth of goods, he has to buy the $100 worth of goods if I want him to buy those goods. But if I give him $100 worth of goods, and part of those $100 is $10 worth of investment goods, I don't want him to buy those $10 worth of investment goods. I want him to take that $10 and save it. So that's how savings offsets investment. So when we had only consumption, we didn't complicate this, right? Well, we didn't complicate it with these other stuff going on. The equilibrium would have been y equals c, right? In other words, the money I'm giving him, he has to give back to me. But now that it became more complicated, the equilibrium is y, the money I'm getting, has to be returned to the producer, either through consumption or through investment, which he doesn't want me to return, or through government spending, which replaces the taxes, or through exports, which replaces the imports. So the equilibrium is not y equals c. The equilibrium is y equals c plus I plus g plus x. Now, what we do to simplify things is we just get rid of the x. Get rid of the x. Why do we get rid of the x? Because we say we're talking about a closed economy. We know we have no exports and imports. Let's not complicate it with exports and imports. Let's just talk about y equals c plus I plus g. Okay. So that's the model. That's the model. Y equals c plus I plus g. In other words, the system is going to come to equilibrium with y equals c plus I plus g. And if any of these things falls, y is going to fall. Right? Because if he's not giving me back all the money, well, the government isn't giving me back all the money. It's going to fall. It's going to go down. In other words, then he'll produce less, and he'll hire fewer workers, and everything's going to go down. Now, Keynes, he believed that Keynes, right? In other words, all this analysis is based on Keynes. This whole analysis is based on Keynes. Keynes believed that consumption has to eventually fall.
Eventually what?
Fall. Keynes believed that consumption has to fall. Has to fall. Why did he believe that consumption has to fall? Well, this was his reasoning. He said like this, listen here. You're a person. You earn $50,000 a year. When you earn $50,000 a year, you consume the whole thing. Now your salary went up to $100,000 a year. All of a sudden, you're consuming only 90% of it. And if your salary goes up to $200,000 a year, you'll be consuming only 80% of it. In other words, when you made 50, you're consuming the whole 50. When you made 100, sure you're consuming 90, but it's only 90% of what your income is. In other words, the richer you are, the smaller the percentage you're consuming. Right? In other words, as your income goes up, you consume a smaller and smaller percentage of your income. So, extrapolating this to the whole economy, if for an individual, when his income goes up, he consumes a smaller percentage, for the whole economy, when national income goes up, they'll also consume a smaller percentage. And therefore, consumption has to fall. As we become more and more prosperous, consumption is going to fall naturally. And if consumption falls naturally, we can go into a recession. And the only way to get out of the recession is to raise, for example, government spending, or the alternative to that is to reduce taxes, which raises consumption. In other words, you have two choices here. We'll get to the I choice in a few minutes, hopefully. But you have two choices here. Either G goes up, in other words, you borrow money, you can't tax and spend it, because you tax and spend it, C is going to go down just as much as G goes up. You can't tax and spend the money. That doesn't make sense. You can't do both. You either have to increase government spending by borrowing the money, or decrease taxes and keep spending the same, again by borrowing the money. Because consumption fell, you have to replace that lost consumption, either by added government spending or reduced taxes. In both cases, you're borrowing the money, and you're incurring a deficit. You're creating a deficit. And that's why this is called fiscal policy. That's why this is called fiscal policy, which is number 5 on your list. You're playing around with the government's budget. Okay, that's why it's called fiscal policy. Now, so that's what's going on here. Well, I'll get to the curves in a minute. I'll draw the curves for you, and you'll see the curves, and you'll also see the full employment. But I'll draw the curves for you in a second. But let me just make one point. So this is Keynes' position. Consumption has to fall because the more you make, the less you spend as a percentage. And how does he know that? He knows it from the behavior of individuals. That's where the flaw in his reasoning lies. That's where the flaw in his reasoning lies. The flaw in his reasoning is right there. He reasons from the individual to the group. Just because it's true about an individual, it doesn't necessarily mean it's true about the group. So that's the flaw in the reasoning. So there's no real reason that consumption should fall. But that doesn't affect the Keynesian analysis. It doesn't affect the Keynesian analysis. Because what did Keynes say? Keynes said, consumption has to fall. What if consumption doesn't have to fall? When it does, you still do the same thing. In other words, it doesn't have to fall. You're right. I have no reason why it should fall. No reason why the country should go into a recession. No reason. I don't understand the reason why the country went into recession. However, if the country did go into a recession, then you're going to have to either raise government spending or lower tax. In other words, the analysis remains the same. The prescription remains the same. Why did consumption fall? Maybe you don't know. Maybe you don't know why consumption falls. But if it falls, you still do the same thing. Okay, so that's Keynes' analysis. Let's take a look at the curves quickly. I think curves are important because they'll illustrate another thing as well. Okay, so we're going to draw the Keynesian position. Keynes believes, for example, if this is Y and this is C, he believes as follows. He believes that this consumption line is going to look like this. Because this kind of a line, and you have to take my word for it, this kind of a line illustrates the fact that as income goes up, you're going to consume a smaller and smaller percentage. That's what it illustrates. This kind of line illustrates. So this is the consumption line. Now, we said, according to our model, Y, without the extra stuff, Y has to be equal to C. You have to find the place along the line that Y equals C. How do you find the place along the line that Y equals C? I'll show you how you find that place. You draw a 45-degree line. Draw a 45-degree line. 45-degree line is all the points 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, and so on, right? 45-degree line is the y-axis equals the x-axis. So in this case, the y-axis equals the x-axis. You're looking for y equals c. You're looking for where the y-axis equals the x-axis, and also along the consumption line, that's where the 45-degree intersects. The 45-degree line intersects the consumption. Because it's on the consumption line, and it's also where y equals c. So you found the place where y equals c.
What is that?
That's the equilibrium. That's where the economy is going to end up. Because, right? That's where the economy is going to end up. Because if, you see, for example, you want the proof, I'll give you the proof, because we said that if he's returning less, where would he be returning less? Let's say he's returning less. Over here, he's returning less. If he's returning less, it has to go down. You see? Let's say C is greater than Y. Right? I'm sorry, Y is greater than C. He's getting more than he's returning. Where is he getting more than he's returning? Right over here. This distance is Y, and so this distance is Y. You see? This distance is Y, that makes this distance Y. And so any point beyond the equilibrium point, Y is greater than C. But if he's getting more than he's giving back, he's going to produce less. He's still getting more than he's giving back. He's going to continue to produce. Now this, so Y equals C is right over there. Now we have to, so we looked at, let me just redraw this. We looked at this consumption line and Y equals C at the equilibrium, but we didn't complicate it with C plus I plus G. We didn't complicate it with C plus I plus G. How do we complicate it with the C plus I plus G? Well, that's simple. All we're going to do is we're going to make the C line a C plus I line, and then we're going to make the C plus I line a C plus I plus G line. In other words, all we're going to do is take the C line and raise it by I. And then we're going to take that line and raise it by G. So all of a sudden we have the C plus I plus G line. And this measures C, I, and G, all three of them. On the vertical axis, you're measuring C, I, and G. And now you're looking for the point, the same thing as before. You're looking for the point along the C plus I plus G line where it's equal to the x-axis, which is Y. Where along the C plus I plus G line is equal to the x-axis? Well, it has to also be on the 45-degree line. So again, it's the same equilibrium. It's the same equilibrium, except instead of having the C line, you have a C plus I plus G line, and you're looking for where along the C plus I plus G line the two axes are equal, where one axis is C, I, and G, and the other axis is Y, that's where they're equal. Now, again, this illustrates another point. The reason we draw these curves is because we want to illustrate the following. Just because this is the equilibrium doesn't mean this is the best point to be. Just because this is the equilibrium point doesn't mean this is the best point to be. You want to be, when we started talking tonight, we were talking about the production possibility curve. You want to be somewhere on the production possibility curve. You want to be at full employment. Just because this is where the economy ends up doesn't mean it's full employment. Let's say this is full employment. Let's say that's full. In other words, in order to have full employment, you have to have more income, more national income than you have. In order to be at full employment, you need more. What are you going to do to get to full employment? You have to raise C plus I plus G, so it intersects it. It intersects the 45-degree line at the full employment point. To raise C plus I plus G. How do you raise C plus I plus G? Again, the way you raise C plus I plus G is either by adding government spending or reducing taxes, which will increase consumption. By the same token, so this, let me point something else out. I think this is also important. If you are below full employment, you have a recessionary gap. In other words, you have to raise C plus I plus G to get to full employment. The amount you have to raise C plus I plus G to get to full employment is called the recessionary gap. By the same token, in the other direction, just because this is the equilibrium doesn't mean it's full employment. Full employment can be here. But by the same token, full employment can be below the equilibrium. So you ask me, how can full employment be below the equilibrium? How is it possible that full employment is below the equilibrium? If for full employment to be below the equilibrium, it would mean that if you're producing all you possibly can, you're up to here, and you're really producing more. In other words, full employment means you're putting all your resources to work, and you can't produce more than 10. But you're really producing more than that. You're producing 12. How can you be beyond full employment? Well, the answer is you have an inflation. You have an inflation. So you're really producing 10, but because prices are higher, it looks like 12. You have an inflation. And if you let this continue, inflation is going to continue. What do you do to reduce C plus I plus G so it should be at full employment? You raise government, instead of raising government spending, you lower government spending. Instead of decreasing taxes, you increase taxes. And you reduce either G or you reduce C, and you come to full employment without inflation. The amount you had to reduce the C plus I plus G line is called the inflationary gap. Now here's the final piece, just to summarize it. This is fiscal policy. In other words, when you're in a recession, the government, let's take the government spending side. When you're in a recession, the government spends more money. But does that mean the government has a deficit and then pays it back? No, that's not what it means according to Keynes. According to Keynes, here's what happens. According to Keynes, here's what happens. There's a cycle, a business cycle. Goes down, goes up, goes down, goes up. In other words, recession, inflation, recession, inflation. So Keynes says like this, listen, during the recession, you want to spend more money. So you'll get yourself out of the recession. And you'll borrow the money, so you'll have a deficit. Then you'll go into an inflation. During the inflation, you'll spend less. You keep taxes the same, but you'll spend less. You'll spend less. G will come down. You keep taxes the same. So instead of getting a deficit, you get a surplus. You now use this surplus to pay back the deficit, and you end up even at the end of the cycle. Now, in other words, Keynes isn't saying, going to a recession, you have to incur a deficit. What happens to the deficit? You just pile it up. No, that's not what Keynes is saying. Keynes is saying, during recession, you're going to, you incur a deficit, yes. But eventually, you go into inflation. When you go into an inflation, you're going to develop a surplus because you're going to bring down government spending. And once you bring down government spending, you're going to have a surplus. You use that surplus, pay back the previous deficit, and you're back to even, and the cycle starts over again. So the whole point of Keynes is that during the recession, instead of having the cycle go up and down like this, during the recession, you bring it up, and during the inflation, you bring it down, so the cycle is not as severe. You stabilize the cycle. You see, you stabilize the cycle. Okay, so that is fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is you try to regulate the economy or stabilize the cycle. Try to regulate the economy or stabilize the cycle by incurring a deficit, incurring a surplus, and using one to pay off the other. Now there's another thing that the government can do to get out of the recession. Y equals C plus I plus G. So we said C is going to fall, right? We said C is going to fall, you have to raise one of the others. So we said you raise government spending. Now we're going to take a look at how you can influence investment. Now we're going to take a look at how you can possibly get investment to help you out. And this is called monetary policy. Monetary policy is not properly the province of the government. It's actually the province of the Federal Reserve, but nevertheless, being that the Federal Reserve is an agency of the government, it's also part of how the government does it. Okay. So when C goes down, you have a choice. You can either use G or you can use I. How do you use I? So how do you use I? Okay. Let's take a look at this. First thing we have to look at is the money multiplier. Money multiplier means how the banking system creates money. Okay? How the banking system creates money. Let me describe to you how the banking system creates money. Now we're getting into a whole different subject. Again, I need it. How does the banking system create money? Okay, take a look at this. This is the money multiplier. Let's say I put $100 in the bank. What does the bank do with that $100? Here's what the bank does with that $100. It takes some of that money and it puts it on reserve. And it takes some of that money and blends it out. What do you mean it puts it on reserve? Well, here's what's happening. What do you mean by puts it on reserve? Here's what's happening. Whenever a bank gets money, it wants to make money on that money, right? It wants to make money on that money. But the only way it can make money on that money is to lend it out. But the government doesn't allow them to lend out the entire amount. The government doesn't allow them to lend out the entire amount. Why doesn't the government allow them to lend out the entire amount? Because it says, listen, depositor doesn't come for his money, you're going to have some money for the depositor, right? You're going to have some money for the depositor. So you can't lend out the whole thing, so you have to keep a certain amount of reserve. All your depositors aren't going to come, but some of them will come. So you have to have a certain amount of money to pay the depositors who come for their deposits. So let's say the reserve ratio that the Federal Reserve sets is 10%. Let's say the reserve ratio is 10%. So I put $100 in the bank puts on reserve $10, lends out $90. Person who borrows the $90, he takes that $90 and spends it in a shoe store. At the end of the day, the guy who owns the shoe store takes the $90 and puts it in another bank. So right away you can see that the $100 I put in the bank becomes another deposit of $90. So the money supply is increased. Now, same thing happens to this $90. $9 put on reserve, $81, right? $81 is lent out. Eventually it ends up in another bank, right? So the first $100 makes $90, makes $81, makes $72. Now, as you can see, this series is declining. It's going down. This series is declining. And it's eventually going to peter out. It's going to get to zero. So it is going to converge to something. It's going to converge. In other words, it's not a diverging series. It doesn't keep up. It doesn't get bigger and bigger and bigger and never stop. But it gets smaller and smaller and smaller and eventually it will stop. We want to see what it will become. We want to see what it will become. So here's the analysis of what it will become. X is the money that I put in the bank at first, right? X. Now 90 is 1 minus R times X, right? 90 is 1 minus R times X because it's 100% minus the 10%, which is 90% times 100, which is 1 minus R times X. And the 81 is 1 minus R times this. So it's 1 minus R squared times X. And then it keeps on going. Now if we factor out an X, X times 1 plus 1 minus R plus 1 minus R squared plus 1 minus R cubed, and so on. This is also a converging series because these are percentages. They're getting smaller and smaller. In other words, that's 90%. 90% of 90% is 81%. 90% is 72%. It's getting smaller and smaller. This entire thing converges to 1 over R. That whole thing converges to 1 over R. So the amount of money that's going to be created, we're looking at, this is all the money that's being created, this is all the money that's being created. 100 times 1 over 10%, 100 times 10, $1,000 is going to be created under this scenario of the reserve ratio being 10%. In other words, if the reserve ratio is 10%, the original $100 is going to create $1,000 worth of checking accounts. $1,000 worth of checking. That is the reserve. That's the money multiplier. 1 over R is the money multiplier, 7. And that's how money is created. That's how money is created. In other words, you put money in a bank, and the bank creates many, many checking accounts out of it, depending on the reserve ratio. Wonderful. Now, let us see how the Federal Reserve can stimulate the economy. If the Federal Reserve wants to create more money, right? Look, 1 over R. The Federal Reserve wants to create more money. All it has to do is reduce the reserve ratio. Because if 1 over R, if R is 10%, this number is 10. But if R is 5%, this number is 20. And if R is 2%, the number is 50. And it's 1, right? And if it's 1%, the number is 100. The point is, the smaller the denominator, the bigger is going to be this fraction. So if you reduce the reserve ratio, you're making the money supply grow. As the money supply grows, the price of money comes down. In other words, money, the price of money, which is the interest rate, depends also on supply and demand. If there's more money, the price of money, which is the interest rate, comes down. If interest rates come down, investment goes up, and C plus I plus G goes up. So that's how monetary policy can affect the economy. What happens is the Federal Reserve creates more money. How does the Federal Reserve create more money? One way in which the Federal Reserve can create more money is through changing the reserve ratio. If you create more money, you reduce interest rates. If you reduce interest rates, you increase investment. That's monetary policy. Okay. Monetary policy is creating more money. Monetary policy means you're creating more money. By creating more money, you're reducing the interest rate. By reducing the interest rate, you're increasing investment. There are 3 ways in which the Federal Reserve can create more money. Through the reserve ratio, which is A, through the discount rate, which is B, through open market operations, which is C. 3 ways in which the Federal Reserve can create more money. We discussed the first way. Changing the reserve ratio, it creates more money. And just as an aside, I will tell you the Federal Reserve rarely uses this method. Okay, the second method in which the Federal Reserve can not so much create more money, but reduce the interest rate. Second way in which the Federal Reserve can reduce the interest rate is by reducing the discount rate. The discount rate is the rate of interest the Federal Reserve charges banks. In other words, when a bank wants to borrow money from the Federal Reserve, it has to pay the Federal Reserve interest. If the Federal Reserve reduces the rate of interest it charges banks, the banks can reduce the rate of interest they charge their customers. And so by reducing the discount rate, they could also reduce the interest rate. And by reducing the interest rate, they can increase investment. C is open market operations. Again, open market operations acts on the money supply. Open market operations. Now, like I said, the reserve ratio is something the Fed rarely uses. The discount rate is pretty much out of fashion as well, because the Federal Reserve, in fact, today, does not lend much money to banks. They expect banks to stand on their own feet. The way in which the Federal Reserve increases the money supply in today's world, and by increasing the money supply reduces interest rates, by reducing interest rates, increasing investment, the way in which the Federal Reserve increases the money supply in today's world is through open market operations. Open market operations is a very simple device. Open market operations is the Federal Reserve going into the open market and buying and selling various types of bonds. When the Federal Reserve buys a bond, it's paying whoever sold them the bond, and the money supply out there in the world increases. And when the Federal Reserve sells some of its bonds, it's taking money out of the market and the money supply decreases. So open market operations is the Federal Reserve going into the open market and buying and selling bonds. Under normal circumstances, the Federal Reserve only buys treasury notes, which are riskless, and therefore it only buys treasury notes. Okay, so open market operations, it goes in and when it buys it, it increases the money supply. When it sells it, decreases the money supply. When the money supply goes up, interest rates go down. When the money supply goes down, interest rates go up. If it wants the economy to expand, it will reduce interest rates. If it wants the economy to contract, it will increase interest rates. Okay. So that is monetary policy, and that's how the government can operate on R. Let's just finish up the last two. Which are public good and externalities. These are easily explained, and the rest will get to play it by ear with you. Okay, public good. What is a public good? What is a public good? Public good is something like a road. Everybody uses it together. Public good is something that everybody needs, but everybody uses it together. A road is a public good. A park is a public good. Sanitation is a public good. Everybody needs it. Public good. How do you get people? Everybody. In other words, I need a road. Here's the situation with the public good. I need a road to go from here to Manhattan. It doesn't pay for me to build the road myself. I'm not going to get enough use out of the road going from here to Manhattan. What?
Are you writing any more on the board, or you're going to stand there? Someone's leaving it there this way.
I'm not going to build the road myself, right? To get to Manhattan. It's not worth it to me. The road is going to cost me $600 million, and I'm only going to get $10,000 use out of the road. I'm not going to build the road myself. But if we all contribute to building the road will be built and we'll all get more use out of it than it will cost us. Right? We'll all get more use out of this road than it will cost us. In other words, if we all only, let's say I get $10,000 worth of use out of the road, you get $10,000, he gets $10,000, and if we all contribute $1,000, we'll get the road. So we'll all gain $9,000 worth of use. So it pays for us to all contribute $1,000 in order to get the road built. But who's gonna, here's the problem with the public good. Here's the problem with the public good. How are you going to get the people to contribute the $1,000? So if you're gonna go around and ask each person, how much use are you gonna get out of this road? And they'll tell you how much use they get out of the road. And then you say, okay, we're only charging you $1,000. Everybody's going to say to himself the following. Everybody's going to say to himself the following. You know what? The guy's going to say to himself, if I tell them that I get $10,000 worth of use out of the road, they're going to charge me $1,000. I'm going to tell them I get no use out of the road. Tell them I get no use out of the road. They won't charge me anything because I get no use out of the road. In other words, if I admit that I'm going to get more than $1,000, they're going to charge me $1,000. But if I tell them I get no use out of it, they charge me nothing. And my $1,000 isn't going to make much of a difference anyway. Because, in other words, my $1,000 is not going to make much of a difference. This road costs $600 million. If they have $1,000 less, you think the road is not going to be built? My $1,000 is going to make a drop of difference. So I'm going to tell them I get no use out of the road. I'm going to be and then when the road is built, I'll use it. I'll be a free rider. I'll be a free rider. Free rider problem. In other words, whenever you have a public good, you have to have everybody contributing to accomplish it. There's always going to be someone who wants to be a free rider. But it's not the problem. There's going to be one person who's going to be a free rider. Everybody is going to be a free rider. Everybody is going to have the same calculation. Everybody's going to say to himself, and if I tell him I get no use out of the road, they're not going to charge me. So everybody's going to say, none of us get any use out of the road, and then the road isn't going to be built, and we'll have nothing. In other words, everybody's, it's the old, whatever it is. Okay, I won't tell you the joke, because it'll take too long, but it's an old.
It's very funny.
It's an old joke. It's an old joke about Mos Chitin, right? So before Pesach, they're collecting for Mos Chitin. So they tell everybody, right? So they tell everybody, there's going to be a big barrel in front of the shul, and everybody's going to have to pour in a bottle of wine. Because then we'll give out the wine to the Aniyim, right? We'll give out the wine to the Aniyim. So this guy says, there's a big barrel, and everybody has to pour in one bottle of wine. So a guy says to himself, and if I pour in a bottle of water, it's going to make a difference in the whole barrel? If I, make a difference in the whole barrel? Not going to make a difference, so I'll pour in a bottle of water. If one guy said it wouldn't be a problem, but the problem is everybody had the same calculation. So everybody poured in a bottle of water. So they had nothing, they had a barrel of water. It's the same thing here. It's the same exact thing. This is the free rider problem. My $1,000 is going to make a difference? It's not going to make a difference. So I'll be a free rider. And so everybody says they're not getting anything out of it, and everybody's a free rider, and the road doesn't get built. That's the issue with the public good. Public good, if you collect the money on the basis of what people are getting from the road, it's not going to work. So you have to force people to contribute. In other words, and who's going to force people to contribute? The government is going to force people to contribute. So public goods are provided by the government, forcing people to contribute. Externalities. Let's just finish up this. When is the next class starting?
5 minutes.
5 minutes? The next day starts at 8:15?
Yeah, 8:15.
8:10?
8:20, it's 8:15. No.
8:20?
Yeah.
All right. It's 8:11. Let me finish up with externalities. It's not going to take me long. and then I'll feel I accomplished something. Externalities. Externalities. Externalities are external benefits or costs that take place from production. Pollution is an externality. In other words, I produce the goods. And as part of the production process, there's pollution. But that's not part of my cost. In other words, I pay for the raw materials, I pay for everything, and I sell it on the basis of what I paid. But as a byproduct, there's a negative externality, there's pollution. And as a result of that pollution, people are going to have to incur costs to clean up the pollution. And my customers aren't paying to clean up that pollution because it's not part of my costs, and I'm not charging them for it. That's not fair. In other words, the total cost of this good is my cost of the inputs, my cost of the raw materials, plus the cost of the pollution that has to be cleaned up. So that's a negative externality. It's external to the production process that doesn't get included in the production process, but is a cost that I'm not paying and my customers aren't paying. So the only way to account properly for negative externalities is to make those negative externalities internal, to internalize those negative externalities. How do you internalize negative externalities? You charge him for the pollution. He'll have to charge his customers for the pollution, and then the total cost of this good will be properly stated. That's, in other words, and there's also positive externalities. In other words, if I live on a street and I make a nice garden, everybody else gets pleasure out of the garden. That's a positive externality. They should really pay for the utility they get out of my garden, seeing my garden, maybe their property values go up because I have a nice garden. They should really pay for the positive externalities. The only way to get them to pay for the positive externalities is to internalize it for them. I'm not sure how you do that, but the point is, as there are oftentimes going to be negative externalities which you want to internalize, or positive externalities which you want to internalize if you can, and that's the issue with externalities. We'll deal with the rest.
Thank you.